right, is everybody ready? Yes. All right. Sorry it took so long. I forgot something. So that was my joke. So we'll get seated. And I think one of the things that's exciting for me about this is it's something that we all forget about. Meaning that we don't really think about our brain because it just kind of works, and then when we just think the biggest thing that we all, how many times have we just heard like it was just a senior moment, right? Or I'm just getting older, I can't remember where I put my car keys. You know, I just, like, my brain doesn't work the same way that I used to. What was that phone number? It was my home phone number I've been calling for the last, dozens of years there. Like, something starts to change with us. And we kind of we think that it's normal because we look around at everybody, and that seems to be the standard. And so that's really when I have to tell you, in going through this process and putting this together, I got very uncomfortable. I got very uncomfortable because what I started looking at was that I realized that I needed to do better. I really realized that I needed to do better, and I thought that and it actually scared me a little bit, because if you haven't heard my story, my dad he had a heart attack at 46, almost died, and then he died at 56 of cancer, and then after he died, we did an autopsy on him, and he had Alzheimer's commensurate with that of a 85-year-old. Oh. And what we know about Alzheimer's is really fascinating is that Alzheimer's itself, it takes about 20 years for it to develop, for the plaques to develop in the brain, and by the time they developed in the brain, it's another 10 years before the first symptoms of Alzheimer's actually show up. So if you're feeling good right now, we've got to look at what's happening in the next 10 years. And I'm just going to run through some brain stuff right here. We're going to simplify. This is all for the women. This is the men right here. We have food, TV, that's men's brains. Good. Now we're food. Right? We'll just keep it real simple like that. But seriously, and we'll see how both of these are really bad for us anyways. But what I really want us to really look at is the thing that started this class off, I was in a continuing education class, and the instructor said that 1 out of 2 people right now that are 85 years old have Alzheimer's and don't know their own name. That's scary. 1 out of 8 people at 65 have Alzheimer's right now and don't know their own name. That's even scarier. But what scared me the most was by 2040, they're expecting that number to triple. That means that the average person that's 60, they're expecting by 2040, the average person that's 75 won't even know their own name. So do the math on that. That's 20 years from now. So if you're 55 years old, you got a 50% chance that it'll either be you or your spouse if the statistics are correct. And it's a little sobering. It's a little sobering, and that's what scared me, because I knew that I actually have a gene that doesn't allow me to detoxify very well. So statistically, I am going to be that one if I don't do something different. And if you don't know where you are, you don't know what to change, and it becomes a random fact. It becomes random. So when we start looking at this, then we start looking about, okay, well, that's our adults, right? Well, if you are a child and you've been diagnosed with ADD, basically you have a 30% chance of developing, from that point on, you have a 30% chance of developing Alzheimer's. So every child that's been diagnosed with ADD and is on ADD medication right now, the risk of Alzheimer's right off the bat, before anything else happens, goes up to 30%. And then it just gets worse from that point on there. Right now we have almost 10% of our population of children that actually have been diagnosed with ADD and are on medication right now. So look what's going to happen, not just 2040, but 2050. And when we start looking at Alzheimer's, currently right now, we spend more money on the treatment of Alzheimer's than cancer. Think about that, if that's not sobering for you. And if you've ever known somebody that has Alzheimer's, the risk of the people that take care of somebody with Alzheimer's, their risk actually goes through the roof, because this constant chronic stress of taking care of somebody with a brain disorder actually shrinks their brain. It actually literally melts their brain over time, and we'll go over that there. The other thing is that when we start looking at the falls and the falls that we start to see as people get older, we start falling. That's not an age thing, that's a brain thing. When somebody's falling down, it means that their brain is falling apart. You have to understand that. It's not just an age thing. Old people don't fall because they're old. They fall because their brain is degenerating there. And so then we start looking at this. Okay, these are scary statistics, but what are the costs? $174,000 a year. Does anybody have $174,000 a year that they would like to spend on their Alzheimer's, on taking care of themselves if they have Alzheimer's? Because you got a 1 in 2 chance, right, in the next 30 years. That's scary money. And we work our whole life, and we create all these memories, and we go on vacations, and we do all these things in these relationships, and we have these special books and things, and then we lose it all. Like everything that we accumulate our whole life, the things that are valuable, the memories, the things that if you were in a fire right now in Napa and that fire and your house burned down, the only thing you'd have is your memories. That's what disappears. And if you've ever seen somebody with Alzheimer's, it's not just they forget their name. They forget the people they love. They forget how to feed themselves. They forget how to eat. And they actually eventually forget how to breathe. Because the brain controls every single thing, and it's not just a memory issue, it's a brain issue there. ADD, depression, we're at $10,000 a year of lost income. Think of that cost over a lifetime for somebody that has depression there. We're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost income and $79,000 a year in a nursing home. So those, that's a low number right there. But you think about it, I saw another one that was like 143,000, depending on which nursing home you go to. But the point is the reason why a lot of times I put these statistics up, and we're like, oh well, that's going to be who? Not me. It's somebody else, right? It's always going to be somebody else. And so that's why I had you fill out the quiz here. And what I want to do is I want you to look at those checks. Those things that I put on there are signs of brain degeneration. Those are signs of early brain degeneration. So every one of those that you checked, that's an early indicator that your brain is degenerating right now. So what I want you to look at is that there's 5 different areas that we're really going to focus on with the brain. And this is not a neuroanatomy class, but it is. Because I need you to understand, because if you understand what I understand, then you'll be able to take better action with it. And so you have your frontal lobe right here, which is your executive center. It makes a lot of your decisions. It's the thing that controls voluntary motor. So like if you're going to go scratch your nose, that's the thing that allows you to do that. When we have our temporal lobe right here, this is the area that's affected by Alzheimer's. This is the area where our memories are. This is the area where we go from short to long-term memory. We have right here we have our cerebellum, which is for balance and coordination and fine motor control. So like if somebody's reaching out and they have something like Parkinson's, for example, their hand will shake there. You have your occipital lobe, which controls vision, and then you have your parietal lobe there. And this is where your ability to where your body is in space, to even know that you exist in space. And we're going to go through a couple of these things because I think it's critically important. And every single time that you say, oh, maybe that's me, what I want you to do is just make a hash mark on the piece of paper there. So here's your frontal cortex. So when you find that yourself moving slower there, if you're experiencing depression is not a chemical issue, it's a frontal lobe issue. So if you've been diagnosed with depression, that's a frontal lobe issue. It means that there's brain damage and degeneration there. We look at mental sluggishness or laziness where we can't really quite think through things. We have a project and we can't really work through that project there. We have like a pile of papers on our desk and we can't really get through that pile of papers there. Full impulse control. We find people that have frontal lobe issues. They're the people that they cheat on their spouse. Just something happens and they cheat on their spouse. Or the kids with ADD, they have poor impulse control. They have frontal lobe issues there. One of the things that I look at when somebody comes into the office is I actually look at your handwriting. That gives me a very good indicator of how your brain is functioning there. I'm looking at, is it shaky, is it scratchy, is it tilted one direction and the other direction, is there no balance or coordination to it? Because as the handwriting goes away, so does the frontal lobe there. Poor social and behavior. We start looking at, and we'll go into this in a second, when we start looking at some of these people that, for example, the man in Las Vegas, he had impulse control but poor social behavior judgment. His issue was a frontal lobe issue there. Does that make sense? It wasn't that he had bad thoughts or he just had something. He had a frontal lobe issue. It was a degenerative problem in his brain. And once we understand our actions are a result or a reflection of of the status of our brain, then we will take different actions there. If you're having problems doing math, when you used to do math in your head, now you're using your phone. Problems with learning new languages or actually learning math, like to understand math. And so if you think of a child in school, they're like, well, I'm just no good at math. it's probably because there's a frontal lobe issue going on there. We have to stop saying what we're good or we're not good at. And in a second, we're going to talk about plasticity, but it's what we've developed there. Coordinated movements, such as dancing. These things right here are frontal lobe issues there. This is critical. This is the thing that separates us from almost every living creature out there, is these things right here, the ability to know right from wrong, when to do something and when not to do it, what's appropriate socially and what's not appropriate socially. The temporal lobe. This is the Alzheimer's lobe that we were talking about. So we have poor memory, but some of the indicators that you can find out are if you're having a conversation with somebody, you can't understand somebody when there's a lot of background noise going on. That's a very good indicator that there's damage that is occurring in the temporal lobe. So if the TV's going on and your wife calls you and you're like, what? You have to turn the TV down when you didn't used to have to do that? That's not a hearing issue, that's a temporal lobe issue there. We start looking at tinnitus or ringing in the ears. If you start having ringing in the ears, like a ee sound in your ears, that is a dire warning. That's a red flag warning, because when we start looking at that, that's a very big indicator of degeneration in that temporal lobe. If we start having weird fatigue shifts during the day where we're just so fatigued and we just can't figure out why, and then what we also find is that one of the problems with the temporal lobe, it regulates some of our circadian rhythms there. So we'll have problems like sleeping. We'll find ourselves moving into the night owl realm there. And we'll be up late at night and we'll be exhausted in the day there. All of our sleep-wake cycles start to get messed up there. Parietal lobe. Now this is that one that's right back here, feeling unstable in the darkness. So this is when you always walked in the dark, and now you start to put a nightlight in there, or you used to wear high heel shoes, and now you wear low heel shoes there. This is a big one because it's your body's awareness of where it is in space, and we find people that have recurrent like ankle injuries, for example. I have this chronic ankle injury. I keep on spraining this one ankle. Many times it's a parietal lobe issue there. Unable to recognize objects through touch, like where you're looking for in your backpack and you can't, or your briefcase and you're looking for something and you can't really find. You have to actually look to see what you're looking for, rather than just being able to use your hand, because for your brain should be able to tell you what it is because it has a memory there. And misjudging where you are in your environment. This is the clumsy kid. This is the person that, they'll be coming to the door right here and they'll walk into the door and they're like, oh, who put that door there, right? And we all say that sometimes, but those are big indicators. And so as you're starting to put these hashtags on your paper there, what I'm trying to do is give you more leverage. Cerebellum. Cerebellum is the part that not only, this is incredibly important, the cerebellum actually stimulates that frontal lobe there. So when you're moving, it's stimulating your frontal lobe. When somebody has car sickness, when you have seasickness there, when you have a hard time with stripes or patterns, or if you walk into a room and there's wallpaper and that bothers you, that lets us know that there's a cerebellar issue, but it also means that we're also going to have a frontal lobe issue there too. The other thing that's important is poor balance, and so we find people get injured. The thought of the drunk test. If you get a DUI, it's not that you're drunk, it's that the alcohol interferes with your cerebellum being able to function. So anytime that you're actually drinking alcohol, you're interfering with your cerebellum. That's why you get the staggers, that's why you get the walks there. And the subtle shakes. This is a big thing, and we don't really realize this, but you would ask the people that you know, because we get used to it, but there's a little shake that we can start to develop. That little tremor there is a very good indicator, because the cerebellum regulates and it holds keeps your body, your joints stable there. So if we're starting to get little shakes there, that's another indicator there. So hopefully nobody had a hashtag there. But if you did, that means that we got to do something about it. And that's what tonight's all about, a plan. And this plan is about teaching you how to understand the importance of your brain there. Oh, I forgot the occipital lobe. We'll see floaters. The occipital lobe is the one back here that controls vision. You'll start to see floaters in your vision. You'll start to have visual hallucinations. You'll look at something and you'll turn away from it, and you'll still see a little bit of the haze of the image in your visual pattern there. That's a big indicator there. The other thing is that being able to have a spatial relationship with things. By the way, the other thing is that you know, like if you're trying to like hang something and you kind of miss it, or you kind of put your coat on a hook and it kind of misses there. So these are all areas in the brain. And so what I want you to understand though is this, is that the way that the brain works is that it consumes about 30% of the energy of our entire body. It's that important. This little 3-pound bag of tofu that sits right inside this skull right here, it literally consumes 30% of the energy of your entire body. It's that important. 90% of the information coming of that brain is actually information that's designed to suppress the stress response. Okay? Which is great. Isn't that interesting? And the other 10% is motor information. It's telling the body, it's the motor part of your body. But about 90% they estimate is about suppressing the stress response. So what ends up happening is this, is if you look at a baby, what ends up happening, a baby doesn't have a fully developed brain. And because they don't have a fully developed brain, they're not able to they're not able to suppress that stress response. So they become incontinent. Right? Because if you scare somebody, what do? They go to the bathroom in their pants, right? So a baby is incontinent. They're not able to control that. You touch them and they startle. They're much more reactive to their environment. They have digestive issues. They have colic. They have all these types of things there. Their immune system doesn't work very well because when your body's under stress, it suppresses your immune system. And so what we find is this, as the baby's brain develops and gets stronger, the same thing, then they're able to suppress all these things. They're able to control their bowel movements. Their digestive system gets better. That's why you don't feed a baby a Big Mac, because they just can't digest it, right? Like, you should never feed a baby a Big Mac, by the way. But the reason why I put this picture up here is that's what happens when we get older, right? We startle a little bit easier. We get stressed out a little bit easier. We start getting constipated. We start losing bowel or bladder control. All aging is a reverting back to the state in our brain where our brain can't suppress that stress response system. That every single time that we damage our brain, we inhibit that process of suppressing that stress response system. And that is the scary thing. And so, for example, imagine somebody, the reason why this works though is that our brains are very plastic. And plasticity is the term that they use for our brain being able to fire new neurons. So I was at Starbucks, and I'm at Starbucks, and I was having this great conversation. My wife has left me because she went and sat at a table because I always talk to people in line. And so we were having this great conversation. And what ended up happening was this. We got to the counter, and there's this 16-year-old standing at the counter and literally could not do mental math in his head, right? He couldn't count change. And he couldn't, what was your name again? What was your name? Like, he asked me 3 times, and he had to go through my order and kept on missing my order. And this 80-something-year-old guy standing next to me goes, 3 pennies, 1 dime, you're gonna be good. Ask him for a chair, they'll get you one.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay. And then he says, and his name is TJ, and this is what his order is, right? But the point is that teenager had about 10 quadrillion synapses happening in his brain every single second. The 80-year-old, best case scenario, had 5 quadrillion synapses happening. How was it possible that 16-year-old had less brain power than the 80-year-old? Because the 16-year-old hadn't developed his neurons on how to fire. He hadn't developed those. He hadn't learned processes on how to think there. And that's the beautiful thing about our brain. It learns every single day. Every single time we have a stimulus, it stimulates the release of something called acetylcholine, which then fires on the nerve transmitters there, and then it builds a pathway into our brain. It builds habits in there. So just as we can have these positive neuroplastic changes, that's how you learn to throw a strike in a baseball game. That's how you learn to, to ride a skateboard. Did anybody ride a skateboard here? Because I did it one time, really, and I couldn't do it. But guess what? If I had done it every single day, I would eventually develop the neuroplasticity in my brain to be able to do something. That's why they say it takes 10,000 hours of practice to get to Carnegie Hall. Nobody sits down at the piano and is all of a sudden, I'm fantastic. No, they have to develop the neuroplastic changes to be able to do that. So just as we can have positive neuroplastic changes, we can also have negative neuroplastic changes. How does that happen? So the thing that happens is this. Negative neuroplastic changes, the number one negative neuroplastic changes is anything that, and the only thing that creates neuroplastic changes is stress. And most people are like, well, I'm not stressed. Well, yeah, you are. Like the environment that we live in, every single chemical and every single toxin that you're exposed to is a stress to your body. It's the late nights, and when you miss a night of sleep, it can take up to a week for you to actually recover that whole week that you're in stress. If you have one kid, you're under stress. If you have two kids, you're under stress. If you have three kids, you're crazy, and you've already lost your mind. So my mom had 9 kids, and I don't know how she did it, but the point is this, is that these stresses, what they do is they cause a constant barrage and stress to our brain. And so every single time the brain fires, the neurons fire, what ends up happening is that they send messages down the spinal cord, but they also stimulate a part of your brain called the limbic system. Okay, the limbic system is your emotional system there. And so as it fires to the limbic system, the more it fires to that emotion of the limbic system, what it'll do is that it'll excite that limbic system. It'll get more and more and more excited. So less stimulus, less stresses can actually make you actually feel like it takes less and less to make you stressed out there. What also happens though is that there's something called IL-6 that gets released, which creates inflammation in that limbic system. And then what happens is if you have an argument with your wife, literally for the next 3 to 4 days, your body's going to be in a stress state because of the release of the IL-6 there. So that argument's not over at that moment. What happens is even though you're not consciously aware of it, you're much more reactive to every single stimulus that comes in during that day. Crazy, isn't it? So it's not just these little stressors, I had no stress today. The stress that you had today is going to affect you for the next 3 to 4 days there. And it's going to change the way that you perceive those stresses. And that is the crazy thing. Because what happens is over time, stress will damage and kill neurons. This constant habituated stress will damage and kill neurons. That's actually what happens when somebody has PTSD. So somebody is in a stressful environment and it's firing neurons on a regular basis, stimulating that limbic system, that emotional system, because they're experiencing a particular trauma. What ends up happening is they can actually get into what they call a habituated pattern. And so it can take the drop of a loud sound or a backfire of a car, or it can, if it was a thing of child abuse as a child, they can see somebody that looks like that person. Now the question is why doesn't it affect us when we're younger? Why doesn't it affect us when you're younger? And why do most PTSD cases, why do people report that the child abuser came when they're 40 years old, rather than when they're 14 years old? Because what ends up happening when the brain is functioning properly, the parasympathetic nervous system is working and it's suppressing that stress response. But as the brain degenerates, as the brain breaks down, it loses the ability to suppress that stress response. So then that stress response starts winding up more and more and more and more. And so that's why we start to see people with PTSD, it becomes very apparent as we get older. People that have stress, they have less stress in their life, but as they're retired now, they're like every little thing stresses them out. Like they're having to, where's this? And the paying the bills is a big deal. And what's happening to the kids? My mother-in-law calls me sometimes and she's like, there was an earthquake. Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, it was 3.1 and I didn't even feel it, right? And she'll say that she was watching the news and somebody got mugged at an ATM up in San Francisco. I'm like, I'm in San Jose. I'm fine. I don't even go to the ATM anymore. Like, who uses cash, right? But the point is this, is that this is what negative neuroplasticity looks like. Does anybody know who this is? You saw him every single day.
Killer.
He was the one from Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
Sandy Hook, right? So of the last 14 like mass shooters that have children, almost all of them had one thing in common. They spent an incredible amount of time playing video games. And so what they did is they would spend playing video games, and your brain doesn't have the ability to decipher whether something is real or it's make-believe. Everything that you see, your brain, it wasn't like there was as a Cro-Magnon man, as you're walking along, you're playing your, Nintendo Switch, right? Like your brain thinks that everything is real. And so when a child, if you've ever looked at a child that's playing video games, their eyes are big like this, their pupils are dilated, they're hyper-focused on it. You can actually see them, their palms are sweaty. You'll see them like rubbing their hands on there. Their heart rate gets accelerated there. They don't have to go to the bathroom because the stress shuts down their digestive system there. And so what happens is, let's say you spend 4 hours a day and playing a video game, or in his case, 8 to 12 hours a day. Now what ends up happening is he's habituating that limbic system, which is the thing that is rage and anger, and that when it's shutting down that prefrontal cortex, which is the impulse control there, and so then he's on antidepressants, which we know that the antidepressants, they actually rob the body of nutrients, which actually create more problems, and it's a vicious downward spiral. Literally, he created a bad brain by playing video games for 8 hours a day. Imagine if he was out talking with friends and out playing sports. He developed that prefrontal cortex that would give him the impulse control there. That's the problem, is that because we're doing something to our brain that's unnatural, this is the result right here. Healthy brains don't do this. People with healthy brains don't shoot people. Does that make sense? People with healthy brains don't punch people. People with healthy brains don't hurt people. People with healthy brains do good things to people. That's what our primary drive is for love and connection with another human being. When we have a bad brain, we do the opposite there. And so when you look at something like that, don't look at it as that this was a bad person. This is a bad brain in a bad person that was negatively changed over time there. So the other thing that happens is, remember, when we're going through this process, if you're not moving, you're not stimulating that prefrontal cortex, which gives you the impulse control and inhibits all of those stresses there. So when you're not moving, all of a sudden that child's sitting there for 8 hours. It shuts that down. That's why if you ever been sitting all day long and you come home and you don't want to talk to anybody and you don't want to interact with anybody and you're super stressed out there, it's because of lack of motion. But then you come to surge, right? Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a second. But so here's some of the risk factors for an accelerated brain aging. So this is what this looks like. If you have if you play contact sports, 200% increase in accelerated brain aging. I just read a study that said if a child plays football before the age of 12 and it's a full contact football, their risk of having Alzheimer's goes up 60%. Just from that one thing there, from the brain trauma and the brain damage that occurs. Smoking, 230%. High blood pressure will increase your risk of brain damage by 230%. ADD medication, 300% increase in accelerated brain aging there. We look at diabetes. It's not a blood sugar issue. If you have diabetes, you have a 340% increase of having accelerated brain aging there. And we'll talk about that. Obesity, it's not about looking good in an outfit. You have a 400% increased risk of having accelerated brain aging there. 400%. Alcohol, 440%, and having a stroke, 1,000% increase of having accelerated brain aging or Alzheimer's or dementia there. So if all we did is just focus on these things right here, your risk of having accelerated brain aging and damage would go down significantly. You'd be able to check off those things that you checked off on the checklist, you'd be able to erase there because your body is plastic, it'll learn. And in fact, there was a study, and I brought this up before, where there was a soldier that had actually had half of his brain shot off. So the right side of your body controls the left side, the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, vice versa. So he had the right side of his brain shot off. He should be paralyzed, which he was on the left side of his body. There should be absolutely no way that he could actually move his left hand. What they did, they put his hand into a box, and it was what they call a mirror box. And he would move the right hand, but the mirror would make it look like the left hand was moving. So every single day, for hours a day, he would sit there moving the right hand, but trying to move the left hand. His brain rewired itself. And he was able to actually move his left hand. Isn't that amazing? Like that's to show you what's possible there with our brain. We limit it because we're not willing to do the work, right? Like how many kids have started piano and then they quit? Because that's just too hard. No, but if you get over that hump, then you're going to be fine there. So this is why I had you take a selfie. So when you look at your selfie, one of the early indicators of brain degeneration and brain inflammation is an asymmetry in your face. So if you ever looked at yourself in your picture and you're like, why is that, my smile looks so weird there, right? And so when you go home, you can look at it right now, it's up to you, but the facial asymmetry like that is a very good indicator of brain degeneration. So the thing that scared me was, this was my face. I took that face when I started preparing there, and I looked at my own selfie, and I saw on the left side, see how much more squinted down it is as opposed to the right, and I'm trying to smile, and I had facial asymmetry there. It scared the pants off of me. It literally scared the pants off of me. Because if I'm doing what I'm doing and I'm having issues, then I'm scared for everybody else out there too. And I had to really look at what time am I going to sleep? Because this is a new thing. So I literally looked back over, family pictures over the last couple of months, and it was just that, after Dr. Mike left, right? Yeah. And so then I had to take over his job, and then preparing for this and doing all these different things. So I lost a little bit of sleep, increased stress, and it happened just like that. It happened just like that. Within a month, I started seeing early signs of brain degeneration. So if you don't know this, you can keep going because you just think this is normal, right? Well, I'll just keep going and doing the same thing, or you can make changes there. And that's what really fired me up for this, because I knew that we had to make changes there. So the big thing comes in is, what do you focus on, really? So studies show that about 40% of things that people focus on, the 40% of the stressors that most people have, because most people don't really focus on what they're grateful for. They, in the morning, maybe they'll write down 3 things that they're grateful for, if they're lucky, or, you see somebody and you say thank you for something when they give it to you, but we're not necessarily really focused on that, because when we're stressed, what ends up happening is our focus starts to go into what we call a fight or flight response. That fight or flight response is there to see danger there. So we're constantly looking for danger, and as we look for more danger, it fires up that limbic system, and we start looking for more danger, and so everything becomes a threat around us. And we think that everybody's trying to screw us, right? Like, everybody's nobody's on our side. We try to get into this protective thing. Well, what ends up happening is, what we find is those stresses in the past, 40% of them are things that are happening in the past. Only 8% of things that we actually focus on are things in the present that are typically constructive. So 92% of the things that we focus on a daily basis are things that we can't do anything about because they're in the past or they're in the future. And only 8% are in the present and things that we can actually do something about. So if we want to start making some changes, all we have to do is start changing what we focus on. Like, if literally you don't want to do anything else, because guess what? You start focusing on that. Now you start bringing peace, and we have to look at this. We can fight this, or we can be at peace with this. So you can have your warfare type healthcare, or you can have your peace type healthcare. Mother Teresa said, I never went to a war rally. Anti-war rally, I only went to peace marches, right? That's what she focused on, and she changed the world there. When you focus on peace, you bring peace to yourself, you bring that sympathetic, which calms down the brain, which calms down the brain inflammation, which stabilizes your thoughts and changes how you think. So the more you think about peaceful things, the more peace that you'll start to have there. So really, one of the things that I talk about, the max mind, brings you a max mind day. And the only thing, have you ever noticed what throws you off is not your day that's on the schedule when you start the day, right? It's the things that you don't expect to happen that you have to react to. Does that make sense? And that is the problem. Most people don't think about their day before they show up the next day. They're literally just thinking about, do we have coffee in the morning? Okay, yeah, we got enough coffee, we're good to go, right? That's how we start our day. Okay, we roll out of bed, boom, we hit the coffee, we sit down, read the newspaper about whatever fires were happening and who got shot or whatever, and that's how we kind of start our day. And then we drink our stimulant, which stimulates our sympathetic nervous system, and so then all of a sudden we have these negative thoughts, and we're like, oh, I hate my job, and I don't want to go to work today, and you know what I mean? That's how we start. But on a max day, a max mind day, what we do is we plan our day so we don't have to react to things. That's the key. So when we talk about a war plan, we've talked about a war plan before, it's about so we don't have to react to our environment. We actually know what's going to happen, and if something fits into our war plan, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. So this is one of the things that when I put this together, I I have a friend of mine that teaches seminars on something called conscious language. And if you ever look at it, it's pretty amazing because literally his friend, one of his, he's a chiropractor, and he is the funniest guy that you'll ever meet in your life, but he's incredibly sarcastic. And his patient was laying on the table, and he's being sarcastic with another patient, and the patient looks up and he goes, "Did you know that sarcasm means to tear the flesh?" So every time you're sarcastic with another human being, you're literally tearing their flesh. And he goes, "What do you mean?" And what he ended up doing was he started making a study and really looking at the language that he used. A lot of times when we use our language, we think that it comes from a place of lack. Does that make sense? What we don't have. I wish I had this. I hope I get this. And it's assuming that it's not going to happen. Now, like you saying to yourself, "Oh, I have $10 million sitting in my back office right now." I don't. Okay, but you know, like you have to be honest with yourself. But the words that we choose have power, and they have power to change our life and transform our thoughts there. So, you know, we don't have to be here tonight. How many people said, "Oh, I can't go out to dinner with you. I have to go to this class at my chiropractor's office." Yeah, exactly, right? But we will get to go tonight. Does that make sense? It's a totally different power there. You know, I have to go to see my chiropractor. I see myself laying on the table, receiving an adjustment, getting the power turned on so that my body can function, heal, and repair, and regenerate at a higher level. So yeah, I'll be there when I'm done, right? Like, you know, I hope I can. I know I can. You know, when my kids are doing their homework, like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do this. I hope I can. Like, I know I can. I know I can. Remember the little engine that could? I think I can. What if he was saying like, maybe I can, maybe I can. I don't think it. Maybe whatever. You know, like he would have quit a long time ago. If I don't, I've done my best. So we got to stop beating up on ourselves, but we beat up on ourselves with the words. And most of the time people say that if you talk to yourself if you talk to other people the way that you talk to yourself, other people would hate you. And that's many times why we hate ourselves, because we talk to ourselves in such a negative way, stimulating that stress response, which is a vicious downward spiral there. And it's no wonder why the brain shrinks over time. This is what a healthy brain looks like. This is what an Alzheimer's brain looks like there. And in fact, they're even smaller there. But what you'll start to see, it's not just the size, but it's the holes in the brain there. The holes in the brain. I had a man that was talking about, we think that Alzheimer's is just this thing of old people disease. If you've listened to Dr. Amen and any of his talks, what he's done is he actually did a scan on somebody, and this guy was saying, he goes, "Well, how often do you drink?" And being a doctor, when somebody says, "How often do you drink?" and they say, "Oh, every once in a while." I'm like, "Okay, specifically. You just give me the real number just so we can move on beyond this." So he told Dr. Amen, just a glass or two a week, and he did a scan on him. And his brain was literally filled with holes. Turns out that he's having every once in a while, meaning at night, and having 3 or 4 glasses of wine every single night. And he's been doing it for 20 years. And literally the wine created so much inflammation and so much neuronal degeneration that it literally ate holes in his brain. The reason why he was there is that he was like, he had quit drinking and stopped drinking, but he couldn't remember things. And he kept on getting into car accidents, not when he was drunk, but he was losing his spatial awareness. He would fly into these rages, not because they were alcoholic rages, but because they were brain degenerative rages. He didn't have that sympathetic nervous system left. I mean, the parasympathetic nervous system left to be able to suppress the rage and those impulses there. He started going off and, buying, cars, like when he couldn't afford them, and he started gambling when he couldn't afford it there. So that's what that means. The brain is a big key. And so what do we do? What do we do? 5 keys to function in the brain, and it's going to come down to oxygen, fuel, your neurotransmitters, toxicity, and stimulation. There's always going to be 5 essentials, okay? I'll sit you guys down. I could have done 20, but I'm just only going to do 5 right now. So the first one is oxygen. When you don't get oxygen, you're literally suffocating yourself, okay? You can live 5 minutes by suffocating. If I was to leave that person like that, they live for 5 minutes. After that, the brain dies. That's what suffocation is. So if you think of a desk jockey, right? He's sitting here, barely moving, in a highly stressed position. So when you're under stress, your bronchioles close, you have shallow breathing there, and you decrease the amount of oxygen that's getting into your brain. Literally, he's killing his brain as he's sitting there. Isn't that crazy? And then as we have less oxygen, our brain goes into a state of stress. Blood vessels constrict. It's trying to get oxygen up to there. The other thing that here's a test. I'll tell you how you can know if you have a test. The problem is that when we're under stress, our body shunts all the oxygen away from our brain, and it shunts it away from our hands and our feet. And so what we start to find is people that have like chronic stress issues that are affecting their brain, they're always going to have cold hands and feet. They'll be the same people that have recurrent fungal infections in their toes and in their fingers. The things that that you shouldn't have fungal infections there, because if we get fungal infections because we have our shoes and our feet. I mean, not our shoes and our feet and our shoes, and they get moist in there. So there's always fungus in our shoes. But because you have good blood flow, you're able to get your white blood cells down into the shoes, into your feet, and it kills the fungus there. Another way that you can look at to see it is you can actually take your finger and you look at capillary refill time. It should immediately turn white. It should immediately turn pink. So when you squeeze it, if it's not immediately turning pink, that means you have decreased blood flow to your extremities there. Well, the problem is that the moment that you are in that fight or flight response, what it does is it actually starts to shift. It starts to shift everything, and so now you're starving your brain for oxygen, and it can't actually, you start having neuronal death. So when your hands and feet are cold, just know that's a good indicator that you're under stress. People say, well, I've had cold hands and feet ever since childhood. What happened in childhood? Does that make sense? What were you exposed to in childhood there? High blood pressure, low blood pressure immediately kills the brain. High blood pressure eventually kills the brain. Okay? And you have to think about that. Oh, 120 over 80, I have low blood pressure, I'm really good. No, you're actually starving your brain. It's not getting the oxygen, it's not getting the nutrients. And so low blood pressure is nothing to be, a low heart rate is good, but not low blood pressure. Low heart rate is what you want. That means you're healthy. That means your heart's effective at pumping. Low blood pressure is not healthy for you there. Anemia, and this is a big one. So when we start looking at anemia, you have to be able to carry the oxygen to the brain. If you're not carrying the oxygen to the brain, you don't have a way to get it to the brain. It's not going to be able to transport it. So we look at anemia. We look at vitamin deficiencies there. We look at you look at alcohol will actually interfere with your body's ability to create an anemia. You can have folate deficiencies and B vitamin deficiencies. Those things are things that you can quickly look at, and you're going to start seeing there's a tone that I keep on talking about with alcohol, because it is incredibly destructive to our brain. It literally destroys brain cells there. But the good news is, Monday, Wednesdays, and Saturdays, this was last weekend, thank you for the picture, your body is incredibly intelligent. It does, like everything that you think that you could do to destroy your body can adapt to it, okay? And so one of the things that happens is that the quickest way to be able to get oxygen, there's actually something called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide, there's three types. There's one that's called INOS, which is an inflammatory one, which actually creates all kinds of like inflammation products which destroy the brain. But eNOS actually increases the blood flow to the brain, so you can actually get more oxygen to the brain there. So it actually increases the like cognitive function, your ability to be able to think there. It actually gets more nutrients to the brain there. And one of the only ways that you can actually get eNOS is high intensity exercise. Interesting, huh? So have you ever noticed that, like, after you're done surging, like your brain's clear? Like you feel like, okay, good, I can take on the day, and the whole rest of the day is good. It wasn't the surge, it's what the surge did to your brain. You don't exercise for your body, you exercise for your brain, because your brain controls your body. And if you think about that I need to go exercise my brain today, because if it's your body, look, if your body's overweight, well, we know that just being overweight is, what was it, like 330% increase in brain degeneration? Yeah, that's a big thing, but at least by exercising, we increase the blood flow, we decrease the amount of stress, and your body's able to heal there. Blood sugar, this is a big one. Low blood sugar is horrible. How you know if you have low blood sugar is that if you eat, you actually feel more energized there. Low blood sugar, you get shaky and you get tired, and you're literally starving the brain of its nutrition there. So if you have low blood sugar, you're skipping meals in between. There's major issues going on there. High blood sugar is just as bad. High blood sugar, what it does is, as blood sugar comes in, all of a sudden, yes, that's great, it fuels the brain, but then the problem is that as it goes, it uses something called insulin to get the sugar into the brain, and the longer that the insulin's been high, it actually shuts down, the cells become resistant to it, and so now your body can't get nutrition into the brain. So diabetes is not an issue of blood sugar. Literally, it's damaging your brain every single day. Literally, your brain is degenerating as you have diabetes there. So if your blood sugar is over 100, literally that day, you just damaged your brain and you accelerated your rate over 300% of ended up, the last, if you're 40 or 50 years old, you got a 1 in 2 chance pretty much of having Alzheimer's. Think about that. So when you can't put down the Twinkie, know that you're making a choice at that time. Our health right now is a choice. Inflammation, brain inflammation, and this is a big one that I really want to tie into right here. When our body's under stress, it actually creates cytokines, and those cytokines actually attack the brain, creating brain inflammation. When your brain is inflamed, it actually sends out messages to the body and it creates inflammation in the rest of the body. So many times what will happen is somebody goes out and they eat the gluten, for example, which will create inflammation in the brain. And then the next day they wake up and their knee hurts and they think, hey, how did I hurt my knee? Just a random pain will come on. You're like, what happened there? Or why am I achy? Because an inflamed brain will create an inflamed body, and an inflamed body will create an inflamed brain. So when you eat sugar, when you're thinking about, I'm just going to lower I don't want to inflame my blood vessels, those blood vessels that you're eating that are inflamed are also in your brain, choking off your brain from getting nutrients and oxygen at that time. When those cytokines, they literally degenerate and break down the brain over time there. So we're going to talk about some causes of inflammation, and the first one that I always tell people, like there was a book called Grain Brain. Literally, it was written all about how grain destroys the brain. And it's not that wheat, the problem is that wheat, it wasn't that they genetically modified it, it was that they hybridized it. They kept on like changing it to a form that our body, there's actually the enzymes that you need to break down wheat, we don't even have the ability to break down those proteins there. What also happens is that when the stat that's on here is that 3 out of 4 people have a lack of blood flow to their brain when they have gluten insensitivity. The gluten sensitivity is gone from 1 in 700 to 1 in 100 now. Sensitivity has gone to 1 in 100 now. Why is that? It's because the amount that we're exposed to. When we have gluten, what it is, it creates an inflammatory process in our intestines that actually goes and it causes the pores to open up. The gluten proteins go into our bloodstream. When they go into the bloodstream, they bind to receptors, and they plug up those receptors from actually being able to fire. And when they can't fire, it creates hormonal imbalances which have a destructive effect on the brain. It'll attack the thyroid, it'll attack the brain, and it creates an autoimmune response where the body, because it's on the receptors, it's similar to many of the other receptors in the body, but the body sees it as a foreign thing and starts attacking itself. But the tissues are so similar to the gluten protein that literally the body's attacking itself on there. Yes?
How do you know when you're sensitive to gluten? I mean, what is gluten?
Well, so gluten is the kind of like when you have like doughy wheat, like the Wonder Bread. That's gluten there, and it's just a protein there.
But how do you know if you're sensitive?
Well, I'm going to show you a picture there. You can actually take a gluten test there, but basically, there's no sense in having gluten. If it's going to create inflammation in some people, whether you feel it or not, it's probably not having a very good impact in your body there. The second thing, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, the second thing I want to talk about is the gut-brain axis. And this is huge because what you have to remember, the brain and the body are separate. And one of the first indicators that we have of people having brain degeneration is actually gut issues there. They start having heartburn, they start having bloating, they start having gas, they start having constipation there. Those are very good indicators, just like we talked about earlier with the babies. That literally, when the brain's under stress, it shuts down the gut there. And so when you have a healthy brain, you get normal gut physiology. When everything stops, the food starts fermenting in there, bacteria start growing and they become out of balance. They start messing up all many of the neurotransmitters in your brain are actually made in your gut there. What we start to find is that we start to get a lot of acidity there. A lot of times people will then take an antacid, for example. Well, the problem with an antacid is it interferes with B vitamin absorption, which your brain needs for proper function, so it's a vicious downward spiral there. It interferes with, and then we start taking like a cardiac medication to because we'll get an arrhythmia. One of the side effects of antacids is arrhythmias in the heart, and then one of the side effects of arrhythmias in the heart is heartburn. So you see the vicious cycle there. So when we have a bad brain, we have a bad gut. We have a bad gut, we start to have a bad brain there, because the bad gut will create inflammation in the body, which will then create inflammation in the brain, which will then put that brain into a stress state, and that's a vicious downward spiral there too. So leaky gut, first sign of brain degeneration typically. When somebody has a leaky gut, it's the first sign of brain degeneration. We can find out if somebody has a leaky gut if you've had antibiotics, even for a few days. And you definitely if you had a full round of antibiotics, it's more than likely that unless you've healed that gut, you're going to have a leaky gut. And why would we prescribe it? Well, we didn't think about it. You know, there's unintended consequences of our actions that we never really even thought about until now we're starting to see the effects of our actions there. Leaky gut causes systemic inflammation, and it activates the brain's immune system, so the brain starts attacking itself there. And what they're finding is a lot of this brain inflammation, it leads to a lot of the psychiatric issues that we have right now. So our brain problems are actually gut problems and inflammation problems. So I think one of the things that when somebody has the brain fog or depression, that's the first thing that we got to look at is how can we heal the gut there. So really a couple of the key things, it takes about 90 days if you're diligent to be able to heal the gut. It takes about 90 days for that gut to heal there. So when you have antibiotics, you got to plan on the next 90 days, you got to pay the piper and make up for the damage that's done there. So getting rid of grains, a lot of the food allergens like dairy and eggs and soy, alcohol is out after that round of antibiotics. So the next time you have a sniffly nose, you're like, hey, maybe I'll just try some antibiotics for that. And you have to give up alcohol for 90 days? Well, it probably makes some different decisions, right? Processed foods, like beans, canned foods, glutamine, anything that, like the glutamine is really bad, like it's like MSG, for example. Glutamine is, like MSG is actually a neurotoxin there. It actually interferes with your body being able to produce acetylcholine, which is the thing that your body needs to regulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is to suppress that stress nervous system, the stress nervous system there. So you go out to Chinese food, guess what happens? That's why nobody ever feels good after Chinese food, right? It's like we feel good when we're eating it, but we don't feel good after it there. So I put a list here, and once again, I'll always make my slides available to you guys, and so and all my notes, extra notes that because I always over prepare, those will be in there. But this is a list of like all of the like things that have gluten in them: the food stabilizers, artificial colorings, imitation crab meat. When you go to get that cheap, what do you call it? California roll, right? Yeah. You're getting imitation crab meat. There's gluten in there. Mustards and ketchups and deli meats, they all have gluten in there. So when you ask why are we become more gluten intolerant, it's because we're gluten overwhelmed in our environment there. We need to have a wide variety of foods in our environment. And the thing is, if you are gluten intolerant, there's no such thing as being pretty good on your diet. Meaning that you can't be like 99%. That's like being an alcoholic. I only drink like on Sundays. I don't drink Monday through Friday. You know what I mean? Like it literally affects you at 100%. It stimulates that autoimmune response there.
Well, you have shampoo in there. Where was that?
Yeah, because there's gluten in some of the shampoos, so when it gets in your mouth, it literally can trigger it. So some of these people that are very sensitive, they can't even be on the same counter as somebody else. Otherwise, it'll trigger an immune response. So I do want to talk about this, and this is really kind of an interesting thing because a lot of times I run into challenges with people saying, I can't stop. I love my sugar, for example, right? Like we'll just talk about cookies, for example, because I do have actually we'll talk about cherry pie. Because I can give up anything in this world. If you put a cherry pie, I'm eating it. That's it. Like I mean, I'll go surge for a month and go run 10 miles or whatever if I have to make up for it. But so. Serotonins are happy and joyful hormone. What makes us happy? Okay? And so we do anything to be happy. And so what ends up happening is that when we have sugar, what it does is it increases insulin. Insulin allows something called tryptophan to go across the blood-brain barrier and convert into serotonin. So then we become joyful and we become happy. The problem is think about at Thanksgiving. What happens after we eat our meal? Right. Too much serotonin actually makes us tired and lazy. And so high insulin levels will actually create too much serotonin in our brain and we'll end up becoming tired and lazy. And what we'll find is we won't have the energy, and all we want to do is sleep all the time. Also, the problem is too much serotonin, which is what it'll do is your brain will actually become immune to it. It'll actually become resistant to the serotonin. It'll stop paying attention to it. That's why when people take an antidepressant, their brain becomes it actually becomes resistant to it over time. Maybe initially they might feel better, a little bit more joyful, but over time it has a much longer lasting impact there. Now, that's what happens when we have sugar. Now, when we have fats and proteins, what happens is that the fats and proteins, they actually use something called tyrosine, and they allow the fats and proteins allow tyrosine to get in the brain. So when you eat fats and proteins, you feel satisfied. You feel that you've been rewarded. You feel it's like your satisfaction hormone. So has anybody ever been satisfied with one Chip Ahoy, right? The whole commercial is about eating a whole bunch of Chips Ahoy. But that's why when we eat fats and proteins, we become more satisfied. We're not hungry all the time. We're satisfied. We eat less when we're eating more fats and proteins. And so life is about a balance there. And so the other thing I really want to bring up is choline. Remember, choline is necessary for you guys to suppress the stress response. It's the neurotransmitter that your brain uses to be able to support to be able to suppress that, to be able to make a healthy brain, to have healthy synapses. So when somebody's, it's very difficult for somebody to be able to get choline in a diet that's just a purely vegetarian diet. So you would get choline in a lot of our meats that we have here. You want to always make sure that you get a healthy meat. It doesn't have to be a Fred Flintstone T-bone steak, right? Like the one that the dinosaur steak or whatever it was. But choline's incredibly important. I'm going to skip that one. Now this is the last section, and we're going to run through a couple things. But really, the last thing that I really want to talk to you guys is about stimulation. So the thing is that your stimulation that your brain works not from above down. Does that make sense? Your brain doesn't work from here down. What your brain does is it works from here up and then down. So it needs to have stimulus to have a response. Your brain is only a response generator. That's all it does. It only responds to the environment that it's in. It's not thinking. You don't have a thought without something stimulating that thought. Does that make sense? Your brain doesn't start digesting food unless you have food in your stomach to stimulate it there. So this is a huge thing to understand in the stimulation process. Stimulation is the key for the brain to work right. You have to stimulate it properly. You can do it plastically, like a positive plastic thing by saying positive words, or you can do by negative words. You can watch positive movies, or you can watch negative movies. You can be in a positive environment and a negative environment. Have you ever noticed in companies where it's a totally negative place? That it's hard to think, it's hard to want to go into work. People are sick there all the time. Does that make sense? It's because literally it's a negative plastic, and over time people have this downward spiral. They don't spiral up in a negative company, they spiral down. So first thing I talked about choline. And what we start finding is these chronic stress disorders. One of the solutions for those is these things called anticholinergic things. And so we would look at Wellbutrin. Well, Wellbutrin actually destroys choline. So the thing that allows your body to suppress the stress response, and we give somebody an antidepressant to suppress the stress response, it actually destroys the thing that's needed for your body to actually suppress it in the first place. When somebody has Flexeril, we look at Valium. It's just a little Valium to calm my nerves. You're literally destroying your body's ability to suppress that stress response, and you're creating that wind up there. It's winding up in your brain, firing up, flaming up that limbic system, creating all those negative thoughts, creating that IL-6 that for days after you take one of those medications, Dramamine, Benadryl, Lasix, Effexor, we come up here, Zantac, for all these things interfere with choline production. This was just, by the way, 2 pages. I didn't want to put 10 pages on there. This is just a few pages. Oh, look at this. Opioid painkillers. Wow, why do you think that it's the number 2 leading, I mean, right now they're like 29,000 people this year will die from opioid painkillers. Their brain is not working right. Does that make sense? Like if you've known somebody that's been taking opioids for a long time, there's no way their brain's gonna work right. Stomach ulcers, antihistamines. Oh, it's just a little antihistamine. We know that people that take antihistamines on a regular basis for my allergies, by the way, allergies are an autoimmune response. Why does somebody get adult onset allergies? Oh, I just started getting allergies. Are you kidding me? No, it means your brain's degenerating, your brain's in a reactive place. We take antihistamines, and that's why we find that people that take antihistamines, they more than double their risk of having Alzheimer's. Because choline is necessary for your body to regenerate neurons there. Hopefully that's a little bit scary. And if you look at that list, this is normal. Like you go to the store, you can buy half of these things off the counter. Does that make sense? You go to your doctor and probably every single person has at least had one of these prescriptions on there that's been destroying your brain. Nobody ever thought about it there. When we look at depression, just the medications for depression increase your risk of having Alzheimer's by 50%. That's more than being obese. Does it make sense? Like that's crazy there. Reduces blood flow to the brain. When we start, so what do? We got to become positive plastic. We got to start thinking, and the way that we start thinking is using our brain. We start to create new things. And did you notice that whenever you create something new, you actually get a dopamine release, your satisfaction hormone. You're like, hey, that's a job well done there. So one of the things that I'm going to do at the end, I wrote this for you guys. It's been sitting on my computer for 2 years. And so it's when you have something that's undone, it created a stress. And literally every time I sat at my computer, I knew this was sitting there. That was when I saw that picture of my eye, I freaked out and I sat down and I finished writing it. And it wasn't perfect, but when I sent it off to have it printed, I got a huge dopamine release of satisfaction. So each of you guys have a copy. I can guarantee you there's some typos in here, but that's okay. Circle them and let me know. And if there's areas that you don't like, let me know. I'll change it because it's not about it being perfect, but it was about me completing that, getting rid of that stress there. But also what I did know is by working on it, I was actually rebuilding my brain there. I was getting rid of stress and rebuilding it. So that's for you tonight. Exercise. So this can be negatively neuroplastic. Does that make sense? So the guy that's sitting there and not moving, he's creating new pathways in his brain there. He's eating his Cheetos or whatever he's eating, or the potato chips that are on his chest. They have bad fats in there, which are creating inflammation in his brain, and he's getting these patterns in there. And so when you start looking at somebody that's not moving, watching repetitive stuff, and he's actually not having to consciously think about something, literally his brain is degenerating as he's sitting there. He's chronically inflamed, he has high blood sugar, he has his obesity there, he has the bad fat sitting there. He's watching something that's not stimulating and probably causing stress to his brain. So let's say that guy comes in and he says, my back hurts. Well, what we know is that he lays on my table and I adjust him and I'm stimulating his brain, but if he's got brain degeneration, how much of a response do you think is going to happen? How much results are we going to get? So that's why we have the 5 essentials. Does that make sense? Like, I don't tell you to exercise because I think it's a great idea. I tell you to exercise because I want you to have a strong brain. I don't tell you to get rid of sugar so you get rid of insulin so you stop destroying your brain. I tell you so you stop destroying your brain. It's not about diabetes for me, even though diabetes is called type 3 Alzheimer's, right? I don't tell you to get rid of toxins. Toxins destroy our brain. They interfere with all of our neurotransmitters. That's why I tell you to make those changes there, because I know that I'm going to give you the right stimulation, and I know that it's not a hardware issue. It's not a software issue. It's a hardware issue. There's an amazing intelligence. That intelligence in your body can heal anything, as long as you're not destroying the thing that was created to allow it to heal things. So if you're interfering with that process, I can make an adjustment, and your brain's inflamed. We already said an inflamed brain will create an inflamed body, and an inflamed body will create an inflamed brain. So when you're inflamed, and you're like, yeah, my back hurts, and hey, I want to talk to you about my knee because it's just started hurting here, and you know, this shoulder's been a little stiff, and every morning when I wake up in the morning, it's kind of a little achy. You're going to have to take a look internal, because we're giving the right stimulation. But where is your brain there, and how many hashtags did you have on that brain? So that's why we look at the excess sitting increases your risk of disease. Does it make sense now why they call sitting as the new smoking, where it's equal to a pack and a half of cigarettes? The life expectancy of somebody that sits more than 5 hours a day is equal to smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day, because there's not enough stimulation. They're not getting oxygen to their brain there. So when you exercise, you're producing new neurons. And guess what? Guess why I don't always get the same surge every day? Because I want you to do new neurons. That's why, remember we were doing these ones the other day? Like, everybody's like, oh, that's so hard. Why does it have to be so complicated like that? Because I want you to have a new brain. I want you to have a bigger, better brain there. So then what happens when we adjust somebody? Now the studies are coming out now that is showing that, boom, every single time somebody gets adjusted, it stimulates the parasympathetic pathways and inhibits the stress response in your body. That's why you get adjusted and you're like, oh, right? So and maybe that's just one. So then they took all these different studies. All these things are indicators of stress. We're looking at cervical muscle tone. And when people get adjusted, when they do, on the research studies, you increase the ability of your brain to use metabolism. Every single time somebody gets adjusted. They actually just did some studies, and I'll go over them, that what they actually found is that when they adjust somebody, their brain lights up. The function of their brain, the ability of their body to use blood glucose goes up over 90% temporarily. How amazing is that? So that means that you're getting more oxygen, more glucose into your brain. It's like literally waking you up. The thing is that your brain is a battery, and your spine is the windmill. It powers the battery. So when your spine's not moving, when your spine is subluxated, there's no stimulation going to your brain, so your brain can't do anything. It's not stimulating the cerebellum, which is like stimulating the prefrontal cortex, your executive motor, your executive center, the thing that makes you you. You lose being you when you're not stimulating. That's why if you read my weekly wellness wisdom this week, it was all about why do I get up in the morning? And if you look at it at the end of the week, it says to world peace. That's really what it's about. It's not about one piece, it's about world peace there. So the input system runs the output system. That means if you have a bad spine, you have a bad brain. Do you ever wonder why we wanted you to do home care exercises? What this does, right? And why we want you to do it in the morning? Because when you do this in the morning, what it's doing is it's stimulating your brain, and it's powering up the body, and it's giving your brain a better awareness of where it is in space, right? And then at night when we're having you do this, right? What we're doing is we're inhibiting the stress response, so that you can go to bed and reduce the adrenal stress that's been on your body and melting your brain all day long. Why do you think we want to do our traction? So that we can put a nice curve in your neck there. Why do we want to do the exercises? Because we're trying to stimulate these new plastic processes to be able to hold your spine in a position long enough so your body can be able to have good input to the output. This is beautiful. This was an EEG, and what they did is they would adjust people before and after. And you can't really see it on this, but this is completely random patterns in this person's brain. Post-adjustment, complete order. Pre-adjustment, post-adjustment, complete order. What they find is when they adjust somebody, and they brought people in that were specialists, and they had a couple psychologists. One of them said to get the same EEG changes on somebody without medication through counseling, it would take between 20 and 30 visits to sit there and talk with a counselor. That was one adjustment there. That's what happens to your brain when you change the input to the output there. Oh no, by the way, this is a person with a healthy pattern there, and they got adjusted and nothing changed.
Okay.
So when it's working right, what do you have to fix? A couple more things that are important to understand. This is the hose, right? You kink a hose, what happens? Well, what I want you to think about, here's your spine, here's your spinal cord. So how does your brain get nutrients? It also gets it through something called cerebral spinal fluid. Cerebral spinal fluid, and they just found this out. They didn't even know this existed, but a couple years ago, they actually found out that the cerebral spinal fluid actually pulls the toxins out of the brain. It's the thing that prevents you from making the beta amyloid plaques, which are the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. So you have to have a proper cerebral spinal fluid pump to be able to get the toxins out that coagulate in the brain there. If you don't, you get a stasis and toxins build up there. So you look at somebody like this is a pre and a post right here. What does this mean? next time you look at your x-ray, what I want you to think about is, what does this mean? It's not just about a bad curve. It's a bad curve means a bad brain, which means a bad body. It means that your body is breaking down when your brain's breaking down. So when they look at chronic pain, yeah, I want to take care of chronic pain because look at this. It can shrink the brain's gray matter by as much as 11% in 1 year. So when somebody has chronic pain, it can shrink their brain by almost 10% in an entire year. So do we want to wait till we have a problem? Until we can do something about it? Think of how many people that have chronic pain. Look at this. The beta amyloid plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. What happens is that when the CSF is not adequately circulated, it ends up as a plaque. So what I want you to see is this. This is what the CSF pump 12 to 13 times a minute. Here's a normal neck curve coming right here. And that black stuff that you see pumping is cerebrospinal fluid. Here's somebody right here on this side with a reversal of that curve. And you can see that there's barely any cerebrospinal fluid pumped there. It literally is, remember that picture of that hose? It's kinking the hose right there. Now, this is beautiful. And I just found this the other day and I was so excited. So this was sent to me, and this is a same type of, this is, you can see it's a better one. This is a couple years older. This is pre-adjustment. So what I want you to see is, here's pre-adjustment, and you can. I want you to look at the front of the spinal cord right there. This right here is after one upper cervical adjustment on somebody. Just adjusting somebody's atlas, what you see is it opened up the pump, and it started flowing that cerebrospinal fluid. So when your atlas is jammed up against the base of your skull, you're literally kinking that hose, and you can't get cerebrospinal fluid up there. That's why I care about it. Yeah, the atlas is where your brainstem is. The brainstem is actually what controls the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve actually controls like your intestines. That's that gut-brain connection. Yeah, it's right here. So if you're having digestive issues, yeah, but if you don't have stimulation going down, and if you have a subluxation here, it's going to create gut issues, which are then eventually going to come brain issues, and this is vicious downward spiral at that point. So that's what when I look at an adjustment and you miss an adjustment, I'm not thinking about, oh, I got nothing to do today. I'm thinking about that person's cerebrospinal fluid is not flowing. Why do you think Vanessa gets so excited? Like when she's like on, has she ever been on you? She's like, you need to get in for your appointment right now, right? Like, that's why Katie is like, we need to get you rescheduled. Let's get you made up because we want it. It's all about making sure we have a good body-brain connection there. When we get adjusted, this was somebody with a normal neck, all right? This is somebody with a subluxated neck. This is looking at oxygen perfusion. Look at that. It looks like literally like rats got to the cheese of that brain. There's holes in the brain there. If you look at this is what a healthy brain looks like. That's what a sick brain looks like. Because when their spine's under stress, it's sending stressful signals up, causing the blood vessels to constrict, decreasing blood flow, literally suffocating your brain there. This is one of my favorites, and this just came out. What you're looking at right here is the amount of energy that it actually takes for somebody just to move their foot up and down. Okay? This is the firing of the brain when they, just by moving their foot up and down. This is pre-adjustment. Look at this post-adjustment. I'm going to go back to pre. Look at how much energy it takes, and then post. See, what you did is you stimulated the cerebellum, which gives you better body position awareness. You increase blood flow, so every single one of the lobes of your brain started working better at a higher level there. That's what it's about, becoming more efficient. I threw this in there. You guys can look at this, but this is the big thing. Somebody's like, oh, I don't have pain. I'm like, really? Because 64% of asymptomatic people will have a disc herniation within 3 years if they have a reversal of a curve. You got a 50% chance of saying, well, I'm fine, and not knowing what your spine looks like. You got a 50% chance, if not more, of actually having a disc herniation. Compressed nerves, they always occur without pain. And eventually what happens is it affects the CSF flow, which then creates a chronic inflammation within the body, and then you end up in my office with like not feeling good with health issues, and you're like, hey, what supplement can I take to get better? It's not a supplement. It's not a supplement there. Some of the things that we find when people are asymptomatic and they actually get adjusted, yeah, you get better athletic performance, better heart rate variability, agility, balance, kinesthetic perfection. That's just the low-lying stuff there. Better range of motion. How about if we look at objective physiologic changes? They get better they get rid of blind spots in their vision when they get the pressure off the atlas there. We start looking at overall dance performance, health-related, they make better decisions. How is that possible? Just by getting adjusted because you make better decisions? Because your brain's working. Like when your brain works, you don't choose to go to Burger King. Does that make sense? You don't think like, oh, that's a really good idea. You don't get like a what, super jumbo frappuccino. When your brain works, you don't sit there and watch like all 7 seasons of Breaking Bad straight through for an entire week. Does that make sense? Like people with healthy brains don't do that. People with healthy brains are like, I don't have time for this crap. I don't want to listen to that stuff on TV there. Oh, you want to have that dumb conversation with me about that? It literally is an offense to their brain because it puts them into a stressed place listening to stuff like that, and their brain doesn't even understand it, and it wants to get away from it. That's why it's called fight or flight. They're running away from you when you want to talk about your problems because they don't want to talk about their problems. They have other things. They want to create things there. Look at this. So these are things with people without pain. That means asymptomatic. Increased immunoglobulins, it means your immune cell system works. Increased CD4 cell counts. Increased cardiac function. One of my favorite, I just had an anniversary of a guy that's on the wall over there. He actually died several times. He actually sent out an announcement of his death date because he's back to life, and they said he only had 18% cardiac function, and he was basically could do nothing. He ended up being at, I think it was like 68% cardiac function after being at 18% for 5 years. Because the power that made the body heals the body as long as there's no interference. That's why we do these things, by the way. That's what the vibration is. The vibration platforms are there to stimulate the nervous system. That's why we do the tracking. This is 21st century chiropractic. That's why we have to do these things. It's not simpler, it's harder. But we do the hard things first and the easy things get easier. I'm just going to show you a couple last signs there, and I want you to understand how this works. So these are the symptoms. You have a toddler that has colic, digestive problems. Why would a chiropractor be able to help colic? Gut-brain axis, right? So why, if you look there, like how many kids, I can't even tell you how many kids have been brought in over the years with digestive issues there. But a child with a digestive issue eventually becomes an adult with a digestive issue. They have problems with latching, they can't turn their head, eczema, ear infections. These are all brain-body connection issues there. We look at ADD, sports injuries, depression, self-esteem, like how your brain perceives itself, how you perceive yourself is through your brain there. In adults, we got headache, neck pain, frequent colds, all the food intolerances, numbness and tingling. Like those are the things that people are walking around with and they just think it's normal. My kid throws up all the time. Well, it's not normal there. So, and then text neck. So now I want you to think about next time you're on your phone, I beg of you, and I want you to drop your head down like this and remember that video that I showed you. Actually, first of all, drop your head down like this. Take a deep breath in. Now sit up like straight. And now take a deep breath in. So next time you are looking at your phone, what I want you to think about is you just wrapped a plastic bag around your head and suffocated your brain. I'm trying to make it really drastic right now because that's exactly what you're doing is you're suffocating your brain. And then you see a little 2-year-old sitting there for 2 hours, sitting there like this, playing with his video games there, and you can't figure out why that he doesn't have the energy. And we're like, are my kids not motivated? Of course he's not motivated because you haven't stimulated that prefrontal cortex where motivation comes from. How come my kids aren't motivated like me? Because they don't go outside and play like you did. Or you were out talking to people. You weren't like texting people. You had conversations with people. You had to learn. You had positive plastic changes in your brain that allowed you to become motivated. You were out moving, which stimulated the cerebellum, which fired up that frontal cortex, which is your motivation center. So if your kids aren't motivated, if you're not motivated, get yourself moving. So when we drop our heads down, it stretches that spinal cord, decreasing the amount of stimulation that can go to the brain, but it also puts a kink in the cerebral spinal fluid that literally doesn't allow your brain to clear itself of toxins, and it actually prevents oxygen from getting up into the brain and nourishing it there. The further your head comes forward, it can be up to 60 pounds, and then we're wondering why our neck hurts there. And the average kid right now is spending 5,000 hours a year on their phone or on their computer or on their video games. That's the stats. Crazy. So a couple things that are real quick. People ask me if I like standing desks. I have a standing desk. It's right here. This is where I stand all day long. And if you notice that my team, like they never sit. They barely ever sit. And even when you're not here, they don't sit. But just make smaller changes. Park further away. You don't have to park in the handicapped parking spot, right? You can park the one next to it. Just get a little bit further away. Move the printer across the room. Like force yourself to have to move. We become so convenient about having to becoming efficient, but we lose our effectiveness of how our brain works there. So I'm not going to go through all this because there's just too much, and like I said, I had extras, but I just want to show you what's in store for you guys because I'll upload this to the website. It's just the drtjosborne.com. It's under resources. But a couple things, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a challenge. We haven't done a challenge in a long time. We're going to do a brain fit challenge. And what Vanessa's done, she's done an incredible job of putting together the challenge. It has all the recipes, it has all the meal plans there, it has everything that you need, right?
Yep.
Okay, just want to make sure it's done. Okay, good.
Sheet is up here.
All of a sudden, my parasympathetics were suppressed. They're very sympathetic when you give me that look. But we're going to have a brain fit challenge, and the goal is that it's not just about losing weight, even though weight will help, but it's about reducing inflammation. It's about reducing our blood sugar levels there. And that's what it's about reducing our stressful thoughts. And we're going to start it on next Monday. But just make sure you sign up because if you sign up, what we did is I put together 30 days of emails that we're going to be sending you one every single day. We'll be staying in communication there. We set up a Facebook page so that you guys can talk back and forth. If somebody has questions about something, I'll be on there. I'll be able to answer the questions because if you have one question, everybody has a question there. The goal is to be able to take people that want to take action, that want to change their brain and become more plastic, to be able to move forward. Some of you have probably done 5 challenges with me. This will be similar. Go for it. Let's make it better. A couple things that I'm also going to do is, I'll be putting out links because I didn't really talk about omega-3s. Omega-3s are absolutely essential for reducing brain inflammation. If you eat 2,000 calories a day, you should be taking about 3,000 units of omega-3s. Okay? That's just if you eat 3,000 calories a day, you should be taking 5,000 units of omega-3s on a daily basis. So when you're looking at your optimal omega and you're like, I only want to take one of the pills every single day, that doesn't count. Does that make sense? Read the label. There's 2 parts. One of the DHA is there to repair the brain. The DHA is incredibly important for brain repair and suppressing inflammation. The EPA is there to, I flipped it around. EPA is there for brain repair. DHA is there to optimize brain function. So that's why we have both of those in there. They find that if you have an imbalance of your ratios, the average American right now is 25-1. You should have a 1-to-1, 1-to-2 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. You should have about 2 omega-6s to every 1 omega-3. If your ratio is off, you have a 600% chance, greater chance of having Alzheimer's disease. So I want you to think about that. Because the omega-3s are 60% or more of your brain is made up of omega-3s there. It's an absolute essential. Everybody, every day. Your vitamin Ds, they're anti-inflammatory. They allow your genes to express. They stop methylation. They balance out your hormones there. Everybody, every day should be taking omega-3s. Why do you think we put probiotics into the omega-3s? So they can help with gut function there. That's why I think about what the advanced plan is. If you all should have a green book. If you have on the green book on the advanced plan, it says, we're going to try to get rid of grains. Yeah, because it's about reducing inflammation. We get rid of sugars. I can't give up sugar, but I'll do the grain thing. No, you have to do everything. Does it make sense? It's there's no 90% health. Who wants to be at 90% of their potential? So we're going to talk about allergens there. We're going to talk about things like magnesium deficiency. Magnesium deficiency is absolutely essential. About 1/3 of the people in the country right now are magnesium deficient. If you have heart issues, you have arrhythmias, if you have brain fog, the odds are that you have magnesium deficiencies. They're in their nuts and our seeds there. We're going to talk, and the stuff that we'll be talking about in the emails, we'll be talking about folate deficiencies. We'll be talking about where to get these things. Like I said, this will be up there for you. Zinc. Zinc is massively important. Zinc gets burned up when we're under stress. So if you think that we're not under stress, hopefully by now that you realize that your body's under stress, that anytime you use a Tylenol, you deplete zinc deficiencies there. By the way, one of the most amazing things that I find is that Tylenol actually prevents, when they do studies on it, it prevents people from having the ability to empathize with another human being. So that would mean that it actually affects our brain, doesn't it? And when we look at Tylenol, the way that it reduces a fever is by shutting down your brainstem, which is the thing that controls heart rate, respiration, your body's ability to deal and respond to stress and regulate hormones there. So our poor diet, these things will affect our zinc deficiency there. But I wanted to get to a couple things that I thought were really important. Hold on, sorry. I told you this was big.
Yeah.
Come on, it's coming. Right? The toxicity in your brain. And the big thing is we got to stop poisoning our brain. And you have to realize is that all around us there's all these toxins. We have approximately 10,000 new chemicals a year are introduced in the market. 3,000 new chemicals a year are introduced into the market at some point. 90% of them are approved by the FDA. And there's 80,000 right now that are out there. And very few of them have ever been tested to see if they're actually safe. Much less safe with all the rest of the chemicals combined there. Symptoms of toxicity. You look, anxiety and depression, it's epidemic in our country. Fatigue, epidemic in our country. Irritability, epidemic. Just walk outside of this office, right? Muscle and joint pain, epidemic. That's why we take 27 billion pills of acetaminophen a year, because it's epidemic joint pain. Skin conditions and eczema and psoriasis. When I first started practice, I had one patient in the first probably 5 years that had psoriasis. I can't tell you how many people have psoriasis now. Eczema and skin issues like that. Weight loss resistance, all these things are symptoms of toxicity in our environment there. We have our Teflon cookwares, we have our tap waters, we have the heavy metals that are in our but the number one thing of our toxicity and the top 10, these are the top brain damaging drugs: antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, hypertension drugs, sleeping aids, antihistamines, and metformin. Interesting. So just know that if you're on that list there, you are on the top list of brain-destroying medications that are out there. Cholesterol, that's the king. Cholesterol takes the king as far as it being a brain destroyer. They actually call it cholesterol dementia now. They find that your brain's made up of cholesterol, and so when you take anti-cholesterol medications, not only do you stop your body from being able to use something called coenzyme Q10, which is absolutely necessary for your brain to actually be able to, every cell in your body to be able to function, but you literally develop, they're finding, they call it cholesterol dementia, and so I don't even have time because I don't even know where to stop on that. And then this is the last one that I'm going to really show you here. It's that studies conducted on rats using medication that leads to permanent and irreversible brain damage in early life in children. So what I want you to think about is the kids that are out there. It's not their fault. They're only doing what they were told or what they were shown. You guys know better. And we think that the kids don't have problems because they're just not symptomatic, right? Well, like where are they going to be in 10 years if they're living the way that they are? Where are they going to be in 10 years when they're having these negative neuroplastic changes? We've got to take care of our kids because they don't have a fighting chance. If we're concerned about getting Alzheimer's, where are they going to be? You know, we think that Alzheimer's is just as normal for an adult as autism is for a kid now. It's just normal. You know, like 1 in 32 kids gets Alzheimer's. You know, 1 in 2 people get 1 in 32 kids gets autism. You know, 1 in 2 adults gets, 80-year-olds gets Alzheimer's. That's just normal. It's not normal. We chose that. But whether you know or not, you're actually choosing. So I'm gonna move on. Oh, this is what I wanted to show you. Basically, this is the number one thing that I wanted to show you. Here's this thing right here. We have acetone, we have triglycerol, we have propylene glycol, we got borax, we got phenols. These are the things this year that we're going to come up in with our flu shots. And I always get this question. And I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm just safe vaccine. I'm anti-dangerous vaccine there. And so when we look at that, that's what goes just into our flu shot there. And I want to show you what happens just with one simple thing, aluminum, that goes into the flu shot. And I want you to watch what happens to the neuron. So this gets directly injected into your body. When it gets injected into your body, there it is. So here's a neuron in your body. And what I want you to watch is what happens to that neuron the moment it gets exposed to aluminum. And you're going to start to see it'll start to shrink up and literally wither away. So one of the studies that they find with, there we go, see how it starts to wither away right there? And it literally just dies. So when they ask about, like, they look at Alzheimer's and flu shots, you double your risk of having Alzheimer's if you've had flu shots 10 years in a row or 10 years in a row or more. Everything matters because the aluminum in there, the preservative in there.
Do all flu shots have aluminum?
Yeah, yeah, it's a preservative.
It says mercury though.
Oh, that's mercury. That one's mercury. I have another one with aluminum. Sorry, I messed that up. But that's mercury too. They didn't pull the mercury out of the flu shots there. Just so you know. So I really I appreciate you guys for being here. And so here's the action steps that I want you to take. Number one, who it feels like this was time well spent? Okay, good. And I appreciate that because I put a ton of time and effort. Like literally, we shut down the office today to make this happen because we thought it was so valuable. You have no idea how much time and effort that my team put into making sure this happened, and it's only because they care. And so, but like, how many of us were thinking about, oh, I wish my husband heard this, or I wish my, right? Does that make sense? There's somebody that they wish that had heard that. And that's the biggest thing is that, you know, it's, what if somebody had heard this 10 years ago, how different would their life have been? And so there's a message and there's a principle that our body doesn't need any help, it just doesn't need any interference. When we understand and value something, then we protect it fiercely. When you understand the brain and how it functions, and when you understand your nervous system, you'll protect it fiercely. It's not about bad backs. It's about a bad life. And that's what I need you to understand. Bad health equals bad life. And whether, just because people are dropping dead right here, if somebody's subluxated, it's going to interfere with their brain being able to be stimulated and their body being able to be controlled there. And that's the message, and that's why we're having like the dinner with the doc. Dinner with the doc is not something that it's my opportunity to be able to reach the unreached. And what I'm going to ask you is if I can just add as a favor, like, you know, everything that we is to be able to, if you know somebody that should have been here, that's heavy on your heart, get them to dinner with a doc. They might not get the same talk, but they'll get the principle that they don't have to live a life of fear. They can get out of the warfare healthcare and get into the peace healthcare there. And I'm really going to ask you for your help on that because my goal this year is it's about to get this message out to as many people, whether they're here in the state. You know, that's why we're online. You know, my goal is to. It's not. I don't care about my legend. I care about the legacy of what we leave behind here. So that's the first thing that I'm going to ask you. Number two is if this is something you want to take action on and you want to be part of the challenge, like sign up and do it. Okay, just put your head down and do it. And then when it's done, then judge it. Judge how you feel after, not during. It's supposed to suck. It's supposed to be hard. Does that make sense? If it wasn't hard, it's not challenging. You're not building new neurons. It's supposed to be hard. You're supposed to be learning because you're probably living in a way totally incongruent with where you should be living there. Or you can put your head in the sand and be an ostrich and just pretend, and that's your choice there too. But either way, there's consequences of our actions there. And then the last thing is this, is that we're done. Just come and get a book for me. And this, like I said, I wrote this for you. But like I said, it's not perfect, but it's a work in progress, just like we all are, right? You know, and if we try to release ourselves into the world when we're perfect, we'll never be released. And I think that's the thing that I really, in closing, is, you know, my dad used to always say, "Better done than perfect." It's probably not the best thing because a lot of times you can half-ass stuff, right? But the same thing is it's about moving forward in a direction. And a lot of times people they'll take a book and they'll read it and they're like, I'm not going to do anything until I've completely read the whole book. And I have a meal plan right out here, and I've gone shopping, and I completely researched everything I need to about vitamin B12. And then my suggestion to you is when you read a book and when you take this information, what I want you to do is take a step. Page 1, it says, don't eat sugar. Okay, tomorrow I'm not going to eat sugar. I don't know why not to eat sugar, but I'm just going to eat sugar. Stop asking why. Like, you don't need to know why. Like, we all do this, right? We turn on light switches. How many of us think about how that light worked? We're not thinking about the electrons. We just turn on the switch. We turned it off. Like, we know that it works, and we just do that. And that's all I'm going to ask you to do. Is, if some people might say it's blind, that's fine. You can learn as you're going along. You don't have to be a master. It's taken me, I've been in chiropractic since 1987, so it's 30 years now. Think about that. Like, it's 30 years for me to be able to talk like this and live like this. So if this is month number 1 of you being in the office, yeah, you got some practice. You know what I mean? But like, we'll learn together. We're trying to accelerate that growth there. So I just want to thank you guys for being here. I know it was tough getting here for some of you. No, it wasn't. It was a pleasure getting here for some of you. There we go. One last thing. If there's any guests here that have never been checked, what I'm going to ask you to do is just talk to Vanessa up front. And at least we'll get you checked. She's right here, right there. She'll be in the first room there. And what we're doing is, like I said, we're raising money for this cancer, to support this cancer group. And I think what's going to be awesome is they help people, not with chemo, not with radiation, but they also help people with to be able to afford alternative things, to be able to get the care so that they can actually stay healthy rather than trying to get less sick. So that's where we're putting the donations. It's $40 if you've never been in the office. You'll save yourself $150. Make sure if you have your forms that turn them in so that you can get your 10% off. And if you have questions about anything, make sure you don't leave until you talk to me. I'll make sure you get all 130 slides of this, and we'll go from there. All right, blessings, guys. Thank you. I will. Yeah, I know.
I got it.
What's up, Vegas?
Do you guys want to grab the camera or the kids? It's getting bumped. I'm holding it. I just don't want it falling. You got that? Thank you.
Do you need to turn that off?
Should be.